we usually go
These chairs
this year.
have seen better days.
He's just falling apart. Call to meeting the Planning and Zoning Commission, the meeting for Monday, March 13th, 2023. Roll call, please.
Mark Hydrich, Mark Leesner, Mark Piontek,
Here.
Tom Hopmeyer,
Here.
Leon Hagedorn,
Here.
John Borgman,
Here.
Chuck Watson,
Here.
Samantha Wacker, Carolyn Witt,
Here.
Mike Wood,
Here.
Sal Maniaci.
Here.
Please rise for pledge. Pledge allegiance. First item on the agenda is the approval of the minutes from the February 13th, 2023 meeting, if you've had a chance to review those.
I'll make a motion to approve. Second.
First and second, all those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? So moved. Moving on to item number 3, file number 230301, preliminary plat, WW Industrial Park Plat 3. Sal?
Yes, so this is a minor subdivision for a lot at WW Industrial Park. It's actually the car wash next to the ZX gas station. As you can see here on this aerial, it is long and narrow and does actually have right-of-way frontage along Bluff and WW, and that is important when we come to look at the plat. The property itself is zoned M2 heavy industrial, and so there are no minimum lot sizes in there, but under any subdivision, any lot created does have to have at least 50 foot of road frontage. And so you can see here on the preliminary plat that was submitted, they're looking to create this lot to the rear by cutting off, subdividing the lot behind the gas station and creating a secondary lot. Our first thought when we saw this was, well, it's creating a landlocked parcel, but in reality, since it does have right-of-way frontage on Bluff Road, it does meet the minimum requirements of our subdivision code. This went to site plan and we reviewed, and the only comment we have is that this existing 20-foot cross-access easement gets widened to 26 feet, because that is the current fire code. I'm not sure if when this first got subdivided, it may have been 20 at the time, but that was the only comment the site plan committee had. So we make a recommendation with that condition, and we're happy to take any questions.
I have one comment, is the 26-foot fire lane requirement is not an easement, that's the width of pavement.
The width of what? I'm sorry?
Pavement?
Yes, correct. It'll actually have to be the improved access. When they get, whoever ends up going back there, so they can get it approved with an easement. But whenever you come in with actually a site plan, whoever builds on it, they will have to make the improvements to pass that.
Okay, so it's going to have, a 26-foot road is going to have wider than a 26-foot easement, correct?
I mean, not necessarily, it's not a public street, so it's not like a right-of-way within. They could just do 26 feet in there.
And build a road 26 feet wide that's hard surface that won't go outside the easement.
Yeah. I mean, if there was a public road, something they were dedicating to us, then yeah, we would request a wider right-of-way.
Okay.
But we do that with fire lanes all the time. Well, it labels 26 foot on there. And then it's between these two property owners when it's actually built.
Right. And you know, right now, it's just a lot that's got stuff stored on it, so it's not a big deal. But if we approve this, it could be a building at some point down the road where that width would play an important part in our access.
Gotcha. Yeah, we have not, you know, we've heard about a potential user for that, but no one has contacted us other than the new owner of the gas station in the.
Because right now, the road is gravel and full of ruts.
Yeah, so if someone were to purchase that back lot, or actually, we've heard, you know, that there is a user for it, but when they come to us, that's when we would look at their site plan and figure out what their use is and make
So
sure
it'll be
that
done
they.
through
Yep.
site review. Okay.
Yep.
How wide,
Oh, go ahead.
how wide is it, Sal?
Well, there's a 20-foot easement currently. We're requiring it to be 26.
About, what's the width of the lot?
I couldn't.
I can't read that small a print, I'm sorry.
Yeah, I couldn't tell you off the top of my head, to be honest.
There it is, 149 feet. No, that's not right either.
80?
Yeah, 149 feet.
Guess not.
Almost 150 feet.
Okay.
If you look at the.
Yeah,
drawing back
yeah, yeah. There it is. Okay. Thank you.
So they meet the requirements by having frontage on Bluff Road, but they're not going to use the frontage on Bluff Road.
Correct. And so that's why we require some alternative to the plat, which is the
There's
easement.
a creek they'd have to cross there. and
Yeah,
that's-
I didn't think it was
Yeah.
viable. It's just interesting that they meet the requirements to do it and not have to use that frontage.
Right.
But if there's an alternative plan, it's very creative as long as,
Yeah. Subdivision code requires that, so if it's ever built, they are not landlocked. And we can't stop people from subdividing land, and we say you have to have 50-foot of right-of-way frontage so that someone buys it, and we can say, no, we created a lot that has access, you just need to spend the money to get to it. And in this case, they're gonna be using an alternative. But this allows it in the future, if someone wanted to put a culvert in and access Bluff Road, they could.
Any other questions or comments by board members? Is there anyone in the audience that would like to speak on this?
I can answer any questions you guys.
Come on up, introduce yourself.
All right. My name is James Fortner. I'm with Wortman Fortner LLC. We own some gas stations in the area, well, and liquor stores, like the Liquor Cabinet in New Haven, I own that. Quick Warren and Gerald, Jack Flash in Jefferson City. This store would become a Jack Flash. So we are acquiring the ZX on Bluff Road, and we're gonna be making some improvements to that. But we'd also like to acquire the car wash property. Patriot Towing had just acquired that property prior to us getting a contract on the Bluff Road station. So we came to an agreement with him that he only needed the back lot, and he wasn't that interested in the car wash business, so he agreed to subdivide that off and sell it to us. So,
Any questions?
That's good.
are you okay with the 26-foot
yes,
row? Okay.
yeah, that won't be a problem.
All right, great, thanks.
Awesome, thank you.
Anyone else that would like to speak on this? If not, I'll entertain a motion.
I'll move approval with the condition of the 26-foot
Easement.
fire lane easement,
second.
whatever we're calling it.
First and second, all those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? So moved. Moving on to item number 4, code revision noise ordinance. Sal?
All right, so this, I will take the blame for of the delay. If you remember, in October, we reviewed some revisions, possible revisions to our noise ordinance. In particular, more so is that we didn't, the way the code was written had this octave band, cycles per second, and the decibel levels in the different and it had like a range in different zoning districts. We didn't, the city didn't even have, and the police didn't even have the equipment to be able to measure that accurately. So when we got a complaint, which, to be honest, in the 6 years I've been here, there's only been one time or one property that's been getting complaints, and I think that's what drew this at the time in October. And we realized we didn't have the proper equipment. And so in October, we looked at some other communities of what they, and I'm just giving you a refresher, I have not changed this since October. We looked at what some other communities do and then tried to tweak it to simplify it as much and match what we think is appropriate for Washington. And that is what's in your packet tonight. This is just a revised noise ordinance. Again, this is because we have this equipment that is strictly based on dBAs, decibels, that we can measure. And so it's got the loudest a property can be. Here's the receiving zoning category. So even if you are on, commercial property, if there is residential property close to you, you measure that, the police will be able to measure that from the receiving. And so we did have a small group of staff members look at this and make this recommendation in October. The point was to get feedback from you all. And back in October, you guys recommended to move forward with this. And the reason it didn't go to council is that I went back and looked, and we never did an official public hearing here. It was just a discussion, but didn't open it to the public. So we've advertised this in the paper. We're going to have the same discussion tonight. And again, this is what we pulled. This was something John found. It was actually a study through from Yale that showed typical sound levels, to give an example. And the reason we did 80 for the properties on downtown and C3 for receiving is that a freight train from 100 feet away is approximately 80 decibels. And we thought if a property downtown is going to be as loud as the trains that are going through, we thought that was a pretty good threshold to sit at. The one thing I really want to point out is that, again, this is a zoning code that can be amended again in the future if we realize, hey, there's a complaint, we think it's viable, or we think it's feasible that, this is too loud or not in the best not in the best location, this can be revised. But we think for right now, this is the best recommendation we have to simplify it and allow it to match the equipment the police currently have.
Questions by board members?
So what is the pressure level relative to all of this and stuff though, too? I mean, what does that even mean?
I think that's just the phrasing, the pressure level of how you actually measure a decibel. It's measured in pressure.
Okay.
It's a unit of
Still,
measurement.
Basically you've got just a decibel device.
Yeah,
that's
instead of this octave band and cycles per second that, to be honest,
I believe.
when the police tried to enforce this, we didn't, no one was trained or had the equipment to do this. This was something that was adopted in 2017 when we got the new zoning code, and I think they took it from another city, and we just realized there's simpler ways to do it.
So as far as the police are concerned, all they really look at is the decibel level on this meter that they're measuring at it's going to be at the property line of the,
Whoever's complaining. Whoever has filed the complaint is the better way to do it.
Exactly.
So whoever is called, they're the receiving zoning category.
Right.
And that is the maximum that we could then enforce.
so that they just have to look at that. They don't have to worry about some other kind of based on this and this and this.
Correct.
They just look at that and then they go from there.
Yep.
Okay.
And then you see, we have made it so it doesn't apply to festival districts, which covers, obviously, any of our major festivals. They have to get a letter signed by the mayor designating that district, and that covers our main 4 festivals that downtown does, as well as the fair.
Right.
Any other questions or comments by board? Is there anyone in the audience that would like to be noisy? Come on up.
Now's your chance.
That was good.
If there's no other comments, I'll entertain a motion.
Motion to approve, or recommend, I should say.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? So moved. Item number 5, other business, discussion by board on moratorium on short-term rentals. Sal?
All right, yes. So this was one of the situations, I actually put my full presentation in the packet, so most of you have seen this, but I just wanted to go through here. I figured that was the easiest way rather than write a report, because at this time, we sat down, Darren, the mayor, John Nilgis, myself, we sat down internally and just kind of discussed, and we think this is, given that we have 3 months, or the Plain Zoning Commission has 3 months, or I guess 2 months now, to finalize, 2 months from today, to finalize recommendations, that staff wouldn't actually come forward with recommendations today, maybe just some scenarios that we thought were possibilities, and then we'll let the public comment, and then obviously commission can comment, and then give us some direction on what we could propose from there, and then bring back an official recommendation based on what we hear tonight. So again, these are the same slides from last month, but you can kind of see this map here shows the general area of our existing short-term lodging. This again includes hotels as well. And then just zoomed in layered on top of a zoning map, which I think will be important later. We'll step back to talk about what zoning districts would be most feasible for this. But you can kind of see they do naturally kind of congregate closer to downtown, but obviously it's not just in the C3. It is in the 5 or 6 blocks surrounding it. So again, there are 6,048 residential units, 72% owner occupied. So we have about 1,600, almost 1,700 long-term rental units and 35 active short-term. Again, with the caveat being that people can turn their short-term into long-term and back and forth once they've been approved to do so. So this is who is currently paying the short-term lodging tax. I was hoping to get the Granicus report from them before tonight. Just with getting scheduled and everything, we weren't, Emily and I weren't able to get that scheduled till Thursday, this upcoming Thursday with them via Zoom, so I'll have a better report from them. But I just wanted to point that out, that we are still moving forward with that, and currently are still sitting at 35 active. So again, here are some of the concerns that we wanted to cover from last month. So I came up with staff came up with three possible scenarios of how we could regulate these. So we could make them permitted in C1, C2, and C3. So permitted in commercial districts, that is similar to how we do it now. C2 and C3, they're already permitted. We would just add C1, which is our neighborhood commercial. C1 allows like hotel uses anyway, so it kind of seems like it's just natural for that to also be permitted there. And then we'd make it a special use permit required in the R2 overlay district only. And I'll show a map of where that is. But our R2 overlay, just so everyone is aware, is an overlay district that, so R2 residential zoning is a zoning district that allows for two-family residential units, up no more than two families on a certain parcel. The R2 overlay is a actual geographically defined area, pretty much surrounding the 4 or 5 blocks around downtown, that allows for single-family and two-family, because historically, a lot of those homes over the years, over the last 100 or so years, have either been one or two-family. And so we created an overlay district probably 10-plus years ago to allow for both of those uses, single and two-family, and those have naturally kind of been around the downtown area. And then we could talk about a distance apart from each other. We talked about 300 feet at one point, just because that is the typical length of a block. So if you have someone in the center, I know John sent some recommendations of what that could look like, some other alternatives, and I'll get to that in another scenario. And I think there's a most common, what will probably happen is we'll make a hybrid of a couple of these scenarios. But that was scenario one. And what that would look like here with a 300-foot buffer. So everything in this gold is the R2 overlay. So you can see here, that's generally the area that it covers, right outside of downtown. And then we took our mapping software and we had them draw a 300-foot buffer along all of our existing. So that means there would not be permitted, if scenario one got approved, no one would be able to request a new short-term lodging establishment within any of those buffers. And then every time you'd approve one, that would create a new buffer and you'd have to go outside of it again. So that was scenario one. Scenario two, pretty much the exact same, but there was some discussion, and I think this merits some concern about possibly having some distances or a cap in downtown as well. And so permitted in C1, C2, C3. This scenario two is just a little bit, I think, more restrictive, and you'd have a distance from one another, from parcel to parcel, just because there has been discussion that if the city says they have to be in downtown, or they have to be in C1, C2, C3, and special use permit in R2, then you could be flooding the downtown area with them and still making the affordable housing, you're not tackling the affordable housing problem. Any unit that is now available for rent, if this is the only area of town you can do it, a property owner is going to have more economic value if they go to short-term lodging. And so there's a concern that you'd be taking away any long-term rental units from downtown, or removing that possibility. Why would anyone go to long-term when they could do short-term and make way more money? It's kind of the concern there. And then the other discussion is that you can maybe do one per block in the downtown district on each side of the street. And I'll show you what that could look like as well. And then again, the same in the scenario two is still a special use permit, permitted in the R2 overlay, 300 feet apart from each other. So again, there's that 300-foot buffer. And then if you did a 100-foot buffer downtown, you can see how that gets a little bit smaller. And you could still have two on a block if you did that way. But lastly, our scenario three is to designate some type of short-term lodging overlay district, or whatever you want to call it, overlay district, or there could be, I guess, different terms for it. But basically, it requires a special use permit in residential districts. I have kind of changed my tune on that, and we can get to that at the end here. But you could have it as a special use permit in those residential districts in that area. One property per block on each side of the street, meaning that, once one is approved between two intersections on one side of a block, You could have one more on the other side of the street, but then that is done, that means the block is done, you cannot do any more. And then this would apply to residential districts only, or to the district as a whole. Again, that distance can vary from if you just want it to be downtown, or if you just want it to be in the entire area. This is a general area of what I drew. Again, just kind of throwing darts out here of what this possible overlay district example could look like. This overlay district right here, I drew basically following most. So on the east side of town, I followed that R2 overlay still. So I went to the boundary of the existing R2 overlay.
Do you know that street?
Yeah, MacArthur Street. It is MacArthur Street. Yeah. So that easter end would be MacArthur Street, and then it follows the C2 overlay district. That's this corridor on Fish Street. And then I had it go down to 8th, because that is, again, where the R2 overlay is on the south side. I followed that R2 overlay, and the only reason I expanded it here is that I just kept it on 6th. So here, this is 6th Street here, so any property that was touching 6th. And then I went, because there was already one approved right here, it seemed silly, you know, if they're already operating there, why do we really have an issue? And then I went and included everything all the way up to the fairgrounds. Again, this was just something I threw a dart out there. And this area would be and I don't know if it'd necessarily be an overlay district, because an overlay district is typically one zoning, but maybe we just call it a tourism district, and that's where they're permitted. I don't know, that would be more of a question for Mark. But that was one scenario there. And then, again, I want to urge that this can be treated as a step one. Obviously, we talked about waiting till the comp plan was done at the end of the summer to do this, but we don't want to keep a moratorium that long necessarily. But, you know, when we get more feedback and recommendations, you know, our city codes are living documents. This can be amended again. So we could treat this as a step one truly in this process, and that if we want to change it, we can. But so what we talked about internally was that all three options could include amendments to the way we define and regulate short-term lodging as a whole. And I think that's going to really help fix some of the concern, regardless of which scenario you do, is that you're going to have to really nail down the definitions how these are regulated. So the first is that clarify that it's for transient overnight guests occupying a residence for less than 30 days. Our definition now has the 60 days in there, and then for some reason it was always thought to be 30 days. I think at some point there was a definition, but just to clarify and make sure that across the board, anything less than 30 days is considered short-term lodging. Actually define them as non-owner occupied. So that means it is more of a traditional Airbnb where there's the current owner of the home is not staying in there with you like what would be a traditional bed and breakfast. Require additional registration application that states the existing noise and parking requirements, but have them actually sign it and make them aware of it. Proof of insurance of a $1 million in liability in the application. I think that could make sure it is an applicant who is serious about it, not someone who's just throwing, I'm going to put my property in here and let it approve now, and if I want to do it, I'll do it. It's actually someone who's willing to be serious about it. And then that they can have that registration be filled out annually with the business license when they renew that in June. And then I think it is still fair to define a bed and breakfast as an owner-occupied facility for transient overnight guests less than 30 days, and those could still be permitted possibly, just throwing that out there, in all residential districts with a special use permit. And we don't have to do that, but I just thought if it seemed to me when we were hearing from the public that if it was owner-occupied, people were less concerned. Well, we still have a handful of traditional bed and breakfasts in town, and that could still be a possibility. So I think it'd be worthwhile having that as two different defined uses. So that's kind of where I leave it.
So the 300-foot distance, yes, my question with that is how is that measured? Is that from property line or is that from building?
It is from we can do it either way. Currently on there, our mapping systems picks a center point in the property.
On street frontage?
Center
Point in the lot?
Center of the lot. If you zoom in
GIS
here,
takes the center of the lot.
and it draws a buffer around it. This is just on the mapping software. The mapping software also allows you to do it by parcel, which you can do.
And I guess, and that's the reason I suggested we do one per side of street in a block, because then you don't have to worry about who's gonna measure, where's the enforcement if it's 299 feet. You know, to me, it clouds the issue a little bit and makes it a little bit more
Yeah,
restrictive.
and after you sent that email, I agree.
Okay.
And I think that that is the intent of it, that you don't want it
Right.
overtaking a block. And if you have, I think the example we wanted to show was hold on. High Street here, there's two across the street from each other. Well, I've never had any complaints about that one, not to say that there aren't any, but maybe that's a perfect example where that's not too many on that area of High Street.
Right.
Those are both in the R2 overlay.
And I just thought that would make it simpler to police and approve and all that.
Yep.
Without having somebody from staff have to go out and verify that it's 300 feet.
Yeah. And there are blocks that are shorter or longer than others, but I think that's just
Right, yeah.
the way it is.
That's the other thing, is
That's the
there
built
are some
environment.
blocks that are rather long and
Yeah.
stuff too, you know.
But I think there's an argument to be made that even if you have a longer block, you don't have, that's still your neighborhood. That's just
Right.
the built environment you have, and whether your block happens to be 300 feet or 500 feet,
Right.
you're gonna
Exactly.
get, there's gonna be one per side per block,
The only
side of the street.
thought I had regarding your scenario two was your distance of 100 feet. And
The
I know,
distance
but
was
it's
very
like-
arbitrary.
I know, but that's, you know, when you have, the scenario was more of them concentrated in the downtown area, getting to that was you end up, you know, the number of places that could be vacant for a period of time, because these are short-term rentals and stuff like that. There might be weeks when you have a whole big area that there's nobody even there in those.
You're right, and I think that's gonna be the other, when I say we're gonna have to create some type of registration form, and that's why none of this is gonna happen in a vacuum or in a month, is that at what point does somebody decide, you know what, I'm gonna switch back to long-term or vice versa? And so I would assume the way it would work is at the end of or in June, when they renew that, they have 30 days to do so, or else it's gonna have to be void. I don't know if we're gonna have to write that in there somehow, because if someone's ready to put one on the other side of the street, you know what I mean? But right now, that block is at capacity, but
Exactly.
that property owner is ready to turn it into long-term.
Right.
You know, and then that way they, as the property owner, can weigh, do they wanna hold on to that license, or do they wanna get rid of it?
Right.
And I know that's not uncommon. I mean, the communities, much larger than us, that have more tourism, I've read and heard about them having, they open up for registration at this time of year, and it's first come, first serve, and, you know, that's just the way it is in some of those communities. So, I think it'd be rare that that could happen, but it could happen.
I would like to see also that the permits can be denied or pulled somehow.
You mean revoked?
Yeah.
Yeah, we talked a little bit about that, about coming up with a procedure where it would apply to any special use permit, where they could be revoked under certain circumstances, where maybe they're not meeting the conditions that were imposed or whatever. So we talked about, I didn't see that in Sal's PowerPoint here.
That is correct, yeah.
We did talk about that. I talked to Darren about that, and Darren was recommending that we include some language to that effect. So that would, even though it's not in here, we would add that.
Yep, and you're right, we talked, that would be, like Mark said, just for special use permits across the board.
Because we've had other special use permits that
Yes.
have not worked out. like
And I
we
will,
thought.
there's one that is coming to mind that we just had to ticket over and over and over because we couldn't revoke it. So it would be maybe a little more teeth to making sure it kept, because if the judge doesn't do anything, why are they ever gonna care to fix it?
Yeah.
Any other,
A parking requirement is a recommendation too, is one parking
Yes.
space for each bedroom?
Sorry, yeah.
What if somebody bought a building downtown and wanted to do like they did with Old Dutch and put in a hotel, small boutique hotel
So
downtown?
my intent of that was for residential zoning districts only. Because currently, we don't have parking requirements downtown.
Okay.
So if you wanted to put it in the R2 overlay, that you had to have one parking space off-street for each bedroom you were creating. And that was one, I think that's what St. Charles did, to be honest. I just saw that and thought that was a good idea.
I think that's been one of the questions that have been brought forward, is people are concerned about the cars that come in with it. So I think it's a fair way to do it. I just wasn't thinking in my mind separating the overlay district with a residential district, but I like that idea.
And then also, you were adding C1, right?
Yes.
And so, what areas cover all of C1?
Well, so C1 is not
I mean, does that
geographically,
go down,
but
is that going like out Fifth Street a ways?
the whole hospital area is C1. C1 is typically our neighborhood commercial, light
Right,
commercial,
yeah.
so anything that's commercial around the hospital is C1, which really makes sense because that was another area that we considered
Right.
possibly including because it is, there's a handful of them going by the hospital, and you think that that may be a use people want them there.
Well, yeah, and then down Jefferson out to 100, is that all C1 then too along?
So Jefferson has its own, Jefferson already has its own issues where it doesn't have, it's all different types of zoning. We talked about that internally as well and decided, since if we're gonna treat this truly as a step one, our comp plan is planning to tackle Jefferson as creating its own mixed-use
Okay.
corridor, and
Right.
we could add that later.
Like Fifth Street.
Right,
Yep.
right.
So
But still, right.
C1 is this dark red. So everything over by the hospital is neighborhood commercial. Yeah, you have some up and down Jefferson as well. You have some of these homes that are, some of these are zoned residential but are businesses on the other side of the street. There's not a ton of
And
C1.
then like on 47, you've got one side of the street, right, but not the other, because those houses over there on Madison back up to it, right? That's what
Yep.
we're looking at there.
Right here, yep.
Yeah.
And then, like, remember that museum was supposed to go, this entire block got zoned to C1,
I remember.
but
that.
homes have been continued to go in there anyway.
Yeah, they just built some new ones.
Mm-hmm.
Lots for sale.
When does that, it doesn't revert back, since they didn't?
If it's unplanned, no.
Okay.
So
Over
how
the
far
Elks.
down to the east does that C1 go? Just to the hospital a little bit and that's it?
There's a few scattered in here, but yeah, the majority of them are on, by the hospital and on Jefferson, you're right.
Okay.
So. This is actually a little bit easier to see because it's a different color. So this pink is the R2 overlay. So that is the general guidelines of where we were, like if you didn't do the district as a whole, you drew it, and that was the general area because the majority of them are kind of in that. But we realized there may be some area, like, my concern is with just going R2 overlay is that if you are still, you are choking it down to a smaller area, and, I mean, look in the middle here, there's some, is there a reason why this in the middle on Cedar Street here should not be approved for that? But if you did just do R2 overlay, none of this would be permitted. There's this weird strip of multifamily, that even like right here, it's all still zoned R3, even though it's single family, two family, four family. That wouldn't be permitted. And so, you know, that's where we were. The R2 is the general area we wanted to cover, but obviously there were some pockets in between. And then going west of the fairgrounds, we do have some in that area already.
How far west down Fifth Street do you go? Was it to High, or is it all the way out to Grand?
High,
Okay.
yep, right here.
I could see that maybe going out to Grand.
See, and that was the other thing, that whenever.
I mean, you start
Yeah.
picking and choosing.
When you have State and Fair Street, all of these kind of seem, they're square blocks with sidewalks, they're walkable areas. But then you have Parkview and what is this? I don't know why there's not street names on here. Some of these, Parkside and then Park, what is this here? These are cul-de-sacs. Parkview and Parkside, you know, typically that cul-de-sac is not the type of neighborhood that these go in. It's, you know, that more traditional neighborhoods. So that was kind of where I drew my boundary like that to follow it, cut this down the middle and leave those cul-de-sacs out of it. But again, that was arbitrary. I just kind of drew a boundary.
I think I would be more inclined to have a new overlay district, even though that's another thing to have to track and keep in our minds what we're doing. But
Well, we were talking about today, and an overlay district is really and I mean, unless another way to call it, and we can talk to, an overlay is an overlay on top of an existing zoning district. And so I don't necessarily want to have this all be, because you're gonna be covering multiple zonings. So I don't know if there's like a lodging district that, I don't know.
Well, and I have a little bit of a concern about that, John, is you're going to create a specific overlay district just for short-term rentals.
Yeah.
Why,
I know.
at what point where do you stop?
I know.
Do you start creating special overlay districts for each particular use that comes up? That gets to be a problem.
I was just trying to come up with some way to expand it, so we could take in more of that west, especially that west territory.
Well, and we talked about that for a half a minute this afternoon, about possibly just extending the R2 overlay to include those areas along whatever it is, State and James and
Fair.
Lewis and Fair, whatever else is in
Yeah,
there.
because that would make it easier, and there's probably some of those older homes in that area that are probably 1 and 2 family anyway, that are grandfathered. The whole point of that, and again, that R2 overlay was, he had homes that were being used as 2 family for decades, but
Right.
they were trying to go back to single family, and currently they couldn't in the code because it was said R2. Why would you ever stop someone from going from 2 family to 1 family if they want a bigger house?
So it would be easier to expand the R2 overlay district as well, and as a zoning
I
district.
don't know about easier, but to me, it's
Where it makes
more
more sense.
logical
Better
to do
precedent.
that than to create just one particular district for one use.
I like that. I wasn't aware we.
But what else comes along with that? I mean, there's a few things, I don't know that there would be particular. One of them is the setback, right?
No, so the only thing that changes in R2 overlay is that it can be single family and 2 family.
Right.
It's the only addition.
And would we have to do anything with those other areas you just mentioned? The R2s right in there?
No, I mean, you could leave this strip out. This is Locust Street. I could not tell you why Locust Street is, this whole strip of blocks is zoned multifamily. I think there was like 1 or 2, maybe 4 plexes in there, so it all got zoned multifamily. You could maybe add it as a special use permit in R2 and R3. Does it really matter if someone in an R3 out on the highway wants to do a short-term lodging? Like if someone at 100 West wanted to do that, would we really care?
I don't think so.
So you could do, that would fill this gap, and then you're really just talking, is it that important to include this over here?
I think we ought to include the west end of the city. I mean, to me, that there's housing in there that I think would be utilized as short-term. Because we've got some out there now already, right? I'm not mistaken?
There was a couple of them not in, but
No, they're right at the edge of the current R2 overlay.
there was 2 of them on High Street.
That's it.
Yeah, those actually not currently, those are in R2.
Where else is there R3 that would possibly be a problem? or like the apartments on, I don't even know if it'd be a problem on Madison.
Don't we have some down in, what's it called, Village West?
Oh, some short-term lodging?
Yeah. I thought,
Not if they're doing it legally.
somebody was in here, Lisa,
Lisa and Dale?
yeah. Who owns
They
the
have
building
one.
there.
I think there's one right at the corner there, isn't that, that one? Not in the right spot.
All right.
Hard to look at these maps.
Yeah, it's-
This is Lisa and Dale's off of, they got that approved.
And they have one over by the bridge.
Yep.
They got that, is that the one?
Well, that's not technically on here yet because it's still under construction. Oh, no, it is. Yeah, it's on this. So,
Yeah, one of them, that's on the right,
yeah.
as you're going out of town, and on the left-hand side, we approved one for Lisa and Dale.
Yeah, that's those apartments.
Right, because there's the loop that goes up.
Correct.
Goes up into there.
Yeah.
Sal, can you go to the map of the, that's got the circles on it, please?
Which one?
They all had circles.
The 300-foot circles.
there you go.
Okay.
There you go, this one.
So this one here is the one I was thinking of, it's Village West.
Yeah,
Oh, yeah, that is,
Yeah.
I don't know who owns that, but they got that approved.
yeah,
Yeah, because this is Village West here.
yeah. I think that's hers.
Oh, okay. I couldn't think of who the owner was.
And that's zoned
R3,
three.
that's correct. It's a 4-unit.
Yeah.
They asked for 2 of them to be,
Yeah.
that's correct. So I think maybe that's a possible answer too, is R2 and R3 are special use permits. Not to complicate things too much, because I know we haven't really made a move, but I was talking about it a little bit more today. If you're going to add so many like add the insurance, add the parking, all stuff that staff is reviewing, I'm just saying, is it a possibility that you don't even require a special use permit? Because if there are check marks that they're gonna have to hit, and they're coming into our office and showing that they hit them, what's the point of sending out letters if we know they can meet the requirements? It's just gonna put P and Z and council in a situation again that if enough neighbors show up, even though these people are meeting the requirements, that they're gonna wanna vote it down when really they shouldn't.
How do we can revoke it then that way?
Well, it wouldn't be a permit, though.
No.
What, yeah, I mean, you would add whether you would require, well, yeah, you're right. If you're not issuing a special use permit, you gotta.
Yeah, you can just make it,
revoke.
yeah, but then how? Yeah, then you can't revoke it, you're right. I mean, I guess you could make that registration revocable, the annual registration.
That's true.
I know there are some
If it
communities
was
that they
annual.
have like a 3-strike rule on complaints.
But you would want that an immediate revocation then, if you got your 3rd strikes and enough people complain that,
I really don't want to police it myself, actually. Yeah,
That's what you run into, is the
Yeah.
policing of it, that gets to be a challenge. Yeah.
Well, hopefully not.
yeah, maybe you're right. I take that back.
No,
Maybe,
but-
maybe you just keep it a special use permit and and it's still in your guys'
Well, and we can take a look at this in a year and see how it is, you know.
Yeah,
whenever-
well, that's the other thing, yeah, we could do the R2 and R3, and
Right.
we could keep track of, here's who's requested outside of that district. How many people are we actually turning down, you know?
No. Do the police they can't really tell if it's, you know, in a special use or if it's a long-term lease or, I mean,
Other than the ones, not unless we give them a list, we can give them this list.
yeah, just give them a list of the addresses if it's called.
Sal, I have a sort of a different question. My memory is that some years ago, the concern about downtown was that there wasn't enough residential housing downtown. There wasn't enough permanent residences downtown to generate or keep the businesses going. Are we defeating that goal by turning the downtown into short-term rentals?
Possibly. I mean, that is a concern. That's one of the things we wanted to talk about, of having the block rule downtown as well. Because if you say it has to be in this area, anyone who has a property is going to go straight to that because it makes more financial sense.
Now, when you say one per block, are you talking about one per block on a given street, or one per block for the whole square block?
On a given street, so wherever you're addressed at.
For each block front.
Yep.
So you could still have, for a given block, you could have four,
Yeah,
You have two right next to each other if they were on the corner.
if they're on the corner, but you could have two back-to-back.
They're meeting the other requirements that we're gonna put in place.
Yeah.
So how many buildings downtown have basically one apartment above them?
I couldn't answer that.
Where if you had a short-term rental, that pretty much wipes out the entire building. So then you're not, I guess what going back to my original question, are you defeating the goal of moving people downtown to live?
Well, that's why I want to do the one per, I think we'd want to do the one per block on downtown as well.
But do you know do we know what that would actually accomplish, or what would that actually do in terms of removing residential housing stock from downtown? Do we know what those numbers are?
No. We're moving in the sense that we're going to have less
Or you're
short-term lodging.
eliminating permanent residents?
You're probably going from long-term rental to short-term rental.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. That's why I'd like to discourage, if we could.
Or limit.
Limit, yeah.
And we really don't have any way we can determine what long-term rental we have downtown, in that downtown district, do we?
I mean,
I know-
not currently.
I know
I'm sure there's a
downtown.
way we could.
I mean, some of those are owner occupied too.
I know.
Sure.
That's what I was thinking.
Sure.
Right, yeah.
Well, I know downtown Washington did a survey, but it was several years ago, trying to figure out what property owners had available space and who was in it or not. And the gentleman that owns the block where just east of Andy's, Mraz, or can't remember his name, but there's a Remax, there's
Yeah.
the brewery, all that. He was approached, and when all this development was going, he suddenly decided, well, I should do something with this. You remember it was a detailing thing on
Yes.
Front Street? And so Tyler might have some, because I know they were really behind, getting bodies downtown. To get a grocery store, you had to have residents. You had to have people who would shop. So I know there was a real active in trying to have some grasp of what was available and what was not.
There's not a tremendous amount of residential downtown anyway.
No,
And if
no.
you're taking out one on each street,
Yeah.
what is that
Well,
number? What is that net loss?
Taking out, right now, it's open game. Any long-term unit could go short-term tomorrow.
I understand that,
So-
but while we're doing this, should we be looking at that as well?
Well, and you have something like Drogies where, I don't know how many apartments are in that, the old Drogie above the
Well, I
grocery
know.
store?
I mean,
Because I know there was some interest, I think, in that turning over into something, because that was long-term rental.
Yeah, I think that's what we would just be limiting it, saying, yeah, you can still do short-term in downtown, obviously, but
Would like long-term.
we'd like to limit it. Hey, we got two on each side of the street here. Sorry.
So if you had the wider radius, bigger radius that you can put downtown within?
I think we just do that block rule. Wouldn't do a radius.
So I understand it's easier to measure, but if you try to do block rule, I mean, could you put it as, again, you know, 1 per square block instead of just saying 1?
Well,
I don't think that-
I guess I'm not understanding what the issue is with the measurement. I mean, if we send notices out on a rezoning, it's 185 feet from the property line. Or if we get protests on a rezoning, it's 185 feet from the property line. If we have applications for liquor licenses, you gotta be so many feet from a church or from a school. So, I mean, we do know how to measure distances. Why would this be any different?
So he brings up a good point. How do you determine that 185 distance?
We measure from property line. We use mapping software.
You use mapping software to measure property line.
Yep, we take the survey of their lot from the county, and I tell the computer to draw 185 feet from the property lines. And then selects any other property owners in that
Circle.
and generates a mailing list.
So we could do that same procedure for something here?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Very easily.
I don't think we're not going out with a tape measure.
No, I didn't know. I didn't know, and
Yeah.
my concern is who's responsible for doing that more than anything else?
I am.
Okay.
I guess the other question comes down to, we're talking about the concentration of these. Is there any talk about how many is too many for our city?
That's
I
a
mean,
great
there's nothing on the top end of this, you know. When do we want to set that before we get too saturated, or potentially be too saturated?
Staff's thought process on that was, if you're gonna have distance from each other, then that figures
That's
itself.
gonna take care of
That
itself.
take care of itself. Why pick an arbitrary number if, at some point, if you're taking distance from each other, there's not gonna be any more room for them?
The way it sounds, though, we're not close now.
And I'm not saying,
Yeah.
I just,
Again, but we review in a year, we'll hear problems arising. Hopefully, we can address, clean up, change the code to get it right. And it's gonna be ever evolving.
and whatever gets decided, I would still like to see, you know, if, since there's no special use permit for it anymore, I think anytime anybody's having a license, I said on our next agenda, it should just be added at the bottom. These were added this last month, just so as a commission member, we have an understanding of how many and where they were kind of going.
I think we're still special use, right?
Yeah, I think we're still do special use in R2 and R3, and then the C1, C2, C3, which you can do today, you're right.
Yeah.
You could give a list of, here's.
I mean, because we're sitting here now thinking, remember we did that one, remember we did, that, you know.
Where are they?
Yeah.
Yeah, and I'm curious, I mean, there's gotta be at least 4 that we've already approved that aren't on this map yet because they're still under construction. This map doesn't populate them until they actually come in and pay their quarterly tax. There's at least one on 6th Street and they're each on 6th or 7th. They were like on opposite sides, remember we approved them back to back, and neither of them are on this map yet because they were still renovating the house.
Would everybody agree with me when I say the demand for short-term rentals are increasing? Why is that? You would say no. You think it's dropping?
Hold on. If you're gonna have,
Let me ask this lady in the green jacket, please.
Wait,
if you're gonna have.
they have to
people
come
talk,
up.
they're
Let's,
Yes,
come on up.
please.
Caroline?
Hello.
didn't
Diane
start
Marsink,
I
Missouri
know,
House
I
Vacation
know.
Rentals. The data shows it's increasing,
Okay.
okay? And a little bit of background is the fact that back in 2014, 10 years ago, 2013, only 30% of the country even knew vacation rentals existed. So therefore, the demand we're seeing is people are actually finding out, oh, this is a way we can travel. And the data has shown that as people realize this is a way to travel, they want to travel this way. And if they don't have a place to try, when they want to go somewhere and they don't have this type of accommodation, they're going to skip over it.
Okay?
Yep.
Thank you.
Thanks.
You're welcome. And I do have questions for you guys whenever it gets to that point.
Does-
And I will say, I mean, as far as the demand goes here, I mean, you guys have seen it, I mean, most months we have them on our agenda.
Yeah?
Until we've advertised a moratorium, most months they've been on our agenda.
Well, I'm going to have to agree with you that demand is increasing. And then I have to ask the question, why is that? Why in Washington, Missouri, we have this demand? Other communities, like our surrounding communities, it's that big compared to us getting bigger. You think that's the only reason?
We got.
Why
we gotta-
not-
we gotta bring
why not
people up. We
Marthasville?
gotta bring people up.
Yeah, if you guys are going to talk,
No.
you're right, buddy.
Really, wait. This is really not a discussion with the people. It was the board. I know. Yeah. But it's a discussion by the board, so we can talk for a long time, like some people did last meeting, which is great. We want to hear everybody. We're going to have another one the next time this comes up, and it's going to be a public hearing. And that's when we get more info. We're trying to get the basics, and I think we'll have Mark try to write something up for our ordinance, and then we can all hash that out at that next meeting. But you can hear what we're saying and what's going on here, and then we'll get that, right? Is that it, Sal?
Yeah, when you actually adopt it, when you actually have code changes in front of you, it's public hearing.
You guys, I think we need to keep that in mind, why we have a demand here and how that relates to our short-term rental situation. And that demand is a good thing. It shows us that we are a place that people want to go to, they want to move to, hopefully. That's what Sal is trying to do, and others, you know. We want those folks to move here, but first of all, they have to come and see us. And how does that relate to what we're doing right here? I don't have the answers to that. There's lots of smart people in this room that do, but how those things relate to one another is key, because as I see it, those short-term rentals, they add value to our community. They improve or have improved a lot of the houses that needed TLC over the course of time, okay? And they bring other people from other communities, one, which enriches our lives, and two, they spend their money. And that's a huge source of pride and income and potential talent for people moving here. And so this is pretty important that we define how that short-term rental, and in my book, especially our downtown area. Because I think, not do they only come to the wineries, Donna, they come to see what we have as exemplified by our downtown, okay?
I wholeheartedly agree with you, Doug. I think this is, the idea here is, how do we take that potential for growth and good for our economy and good
Absolutely,
for our town,
Mike.
and
Yep.
mesh that with what we currently have in our community? And that's where we're kind of pulling strings
know.
and trying to tug a little bit. And I think that's the purpose of it, is how do we get in on the growth without negatively
Losing who
affecting
we are.
others or losing who we, yeah,
There
that's a
you
good
go.
way to put it, lose who we are.
But most things you do in the city, they're a balance.
Oh, without a doubt.
You know,
right.
and we're always doing that. And that's why we have to look at it and say, we can change too. Change with the times, you know. Maybe we do get too many. And I think the comp plan's gonna bring out more, and studies will, and we'll get a better handle on it. But really, the way it sounds now, we're not over that threshold by any means. So,
And the market will somewhat take care of that,
Yes.
I think.
Yeah.
If all of a sudden you're an owner of one of these and you can't rent them because there's so many out there that get rented before you, or your size is the same as everybody else's, you know, you're gonna flip that back into long-term or, you know,
and,
something else.
yeah, I know a lot of people that have come to town and that, they're like, boy, I thought about moving there. I'm thinking about it, you know?
How do we balance that with attracting new families, too?
Yeah.
So Sal, you mentioned the 300-foot apart from each other as the 300-foot being a typical city block size. And I'm just looking at the map here a little bit. And if we did that on the west part of the city where you get the bigger blocks out there, is that really going to work well? Or how do we, I guess that's where I was kind of leaning.
Well, it
Mark's
gets,
comment about each side of the street, I thought, well, maybe we need to just go by measurement, but if we
Yeah, I
look
mean,
at
if you,
being apart from each other, then there's some big blocks out, if you look out there on the west end, just outside the R2 overlay.
if you do it by buffer, like 300 feet, I mean, you can't do it, they can't be across the street from each other.
Right. And there's that big area.
And that's existing. Is that such a big deal right now? I don't think so.
There's this big, this part of town's got some big blocks. You know?
but if you're strictly still by 300 feet,
Right, and that's, I think the distance, I'm kind of coming back off of my one per block side, you know, and that's what this is all about, you know?
What is this?
That's Parkview Court.
Is that a block?
That's a good question.
Is that 2 blocks, 3 blocks?
Right.
What is this?
Good
Is
question.
that a block or 3?
That's great questions.
What is this? A block?
Yeah.
No.
That's why I'm thinking more leaning towards the 300 feet now, that I can see a map and through our discussion. And you explained how you measure that.
Well, this one is from a point. If it was from parcel line, those wouldn't be perfect circles. Those would be square buffers.
Oh. Right, right.
Yeah, because right now, when we, in our mapping system, we say, hey, this parcel just got approved for short-term lodging, you put in the address and it puts that marker in the middle of the property. And then, so I drew a buffer from the middle of the property out, just for the sake of this meeting. But, yeah, whenever I do it with the letters, we do it from property line to get more people, and I think that's how state law requires it. The buffers are more square.
So based on that discussion, then, I would think, I would be more inclined to look at scenario 2 and keep the distance at 100 in the C1, 2, and 3, remove the one property per block, and then add, under the special use permitted in the R2 overlay, add R2 and R3 also, and then keep the 300 feet apart. Kind of seems like that's,
One thing I did want to bring up, I'm sorry I should have from the beginning. You guys did get the email that Samantha's
yeah.
comments, just to make sure. Okay, yep, John, R3, R2, do it by feet.
that's just my thoughts.
and I guess one thing I wanted to kind of ask too was, okay, when you talk about the requirements for the applicant to have all their information as far as noise and trash and all those kind of things, do we currently have anything as far as requirements for them to post that inside of the unit so that the people that are renting are aware of what city ordinances are at that, you know, that after 10 o'clock they're supposed to be quiet or things like that and stuff
Yep,
too?
no, we don't, and
Is
that
that
could
something that
be-
we can add to there so that, you know,
be part of their occupancy inspection as well, just like,
that has it in plain sight for the occupants to see that this is what the owner has signed up to, and this is what the city's expecting you, or the neighbors are expecting you to comply
Usually
to?
it's done when you rent. Usually it's done when you rent. I mean, from what my experience, they make you aware of those things.
Well, since a lot of this is
Yeah.
all online and done through all.
No,
these
that's, I
others,
mean, that's why we do it. Either individually or through services there. But we can do it. I mean, I'm not against that.
And I like the special use permit process, provided we have a revocation
Yeah.
hammer there.
Any other comments? Gina, anything?
All I'm thinking of is about all the minutes we're gonna have to read for next month.
So you kind of have an idea, or do you need
So what I
more?
could do for next month, and if we give me direction, I can have it drafted and noticed so it's public, like public hearing. That's what you guys want me to do. It would be the revision for, sorry, scenario 2. Go back to it. Removing the 1 per block, having it in R3 as well. And then what I'll do is I will create new maps that show what the buffers look like from property line. So you can kind of see what the true areas that are no longer permissible. And then I'll get a copy of Mark's draft change for revocation.
Any other questions, comments?
That's good.
The special use permit would be required in the R2 and the overlay, right?
No, just the overlay.
Just the overlay.
The R2, anything else R2 is typically south of town.
Didn't you say R2 and R3 you wanted a special use
That's what we had, I thought we had.
Sorry,
talked-
R2 overlay in R3.
Okay, I thought we had talked about R2 though, including R2.
No.
No, yeah, R2,
Misunderstood that then, all right.
No, I thought it was.
there's not a ton of R2 that's not in the overlay, but it's like these townhomes out off
Okay,
Stonecrest,
never mind then.
Beaker
that's-
Road.
Yeah.
There's a couple more in, yeah.
Yeah, it was the
Yeah,
overlay and the.
Lewis and Clark Drive, that's all R2 over here.
Very good.
So, anything that's outside of R2 overlay is typically those properties that we're waiting to get into R1C, single-family attached, that are traditional duplexes now.
I guess my only concern is make sure we have plenty of time to review this prior to our public hearing.
Yes, yep. Yeah, we can get that out quick. Won't take long.
All right. Anything else, Mark?
He looks at Gina like.
I meant that she's gonna have to stay on top of me to get it out. Don't let me forget.
Well, that was really helpful last month when I asked to have the minutes out ahead of time for just that discussion we had.
Exactly.
Because we could then go through that, and that's how I developed my list of suggestions, was based off of that input. So I think that really helps, rather than waiting till 4 or 5 days beforehand, and then you're rushed trying to find time for it. So thank you, Gina, for doing that.
Yes. That was good.
You don't need a motion on this, do you?
No, it's just discussion.
Yeah. No other discussion on that? Anything else?
No, our public forum for, our public meeting for the comp plan was supposed to be this week, but if those of you that are on the steering committee saw, we had some bigger changes we wanted to make before we brought it back to the public. And so we're meeting, is it, I think Thursday, right? So I'll talk about H3.
Check my-
So, then, once we get that pared down a little bit more, we will reschedule that meeting. So, still going good, got good reviews and everything, it's just, we had some concerns about logistically how we would do, what the consultant brought, so.
All right, no further business, entertain a motion. Oh, before you do, let me say, next meeting, please come, and you can voice all your concerns or ideas at the next meeting. Thanks.
I'll move, we adjourn.
First, second, all in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? So moved. Thank you.
Nice to see you.
See you next month.
Absolutely.
What's the date on that? I better put that on my calendar early. Things will be in Jeff City by
You can laugh a little bit, yeah?
Not
How
a hearty
about-
laugh.
Easter
How
Monday.
about a sneeze?